A farmer discovers an injured panther and decides to hide it from illegal wildlife traders. But the next morning, FBI SWAT teams arrive at his property, and what they reveal changes everything. The first light of dawn crept over the Appalachian foothills, painting Jack Harmon's weathered farmhouse in shades of gold and amber. At 62, Jack still rose before the sun, a habit forged through 4 decades working the same 100 acres his father had worked before him. This morning, however, something felt different. The animals were restless. His German shepherd, Duke, hadn't stopped pacing since 3 a.m., his ears perked toward the dense forest that bordered the eastern edge of the property. "What's got you all wound up, boy?" Jack muttered, pulling on his worn leather boots. Duke whined, pawing at the door. Jack grabbed his shotgun, an old Remington that had belonged to his father, more out of habit than any expectation of trouble. In the 20 years since he'd retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a senior tracker and enforcement officer, he'd kept mostly to himself, tending his modest farm and avoiding the complications that came with other people's business. The morning air hit his face with a damp chill as he stepped onto the porch. Duke bolted immediately, heading straight for the tree line. Jack followed at a measured pace, his experienced eyes scanning the property. Something was definitely wrong. The birds weren't singing, and the usual morning chorus of his farm was replaced by an uneasy silence. "Duke, get back here," he called, but the dog was already disappearing into the trees. Jack quickened his pace, following the animal into the forest. He'd known these woods since childhood, could navigate them blindfolded if needed. Every tree, every stream, every rocky outcropping was mapped in his memory, which is why he immediately noticed the disturbed undergrowth, broken branches and trampled ferns creating an obvious trail. "Someone's been through here," he whispered to himself, crouching to examine a partial footprint in the soft earth. Last night, during the rain. Duke's urgent barking pulled him deeper into the forest. Jack moved carefully now, his senses heightened, reading the signs around him like pages in an open book. More footprints. At least 3 different people. And something else. Dark droplets on the leaves. Blood. He found Duke at the edge of a small clearing, standing rigid, growling at something Jack couldn't yet see. As he approached, the undergrowth parted to reveal a sight that stopped him cold. Lying on its side, breathing in shallow, labored pants, was one of the most magnificent creatures Jack had ever seen. A Florida panther, its tawny coat matted with blood around its hindquarters. The big cat's eyes, amber and intelligent, locked onto Jack's with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "Easy now," Jack breathed, keeping his voice low and steady. The panther made a weak attempt to growl, but collapsed back, clearly too injured to pose any real threat. Jack's mind raced. Florida panthers were critically endangered, with fewer than 200 left in the wild. This one was far north of its usual range, which meant only one thing: poachers. The exotic animal trade was booming, with collectors paying hundreds of thousands for rare specimens. A closer look confirmed his suspicions. The panther's injury wasn't from a natural predator or accident. The animal had been shot, the bullet having passed through its hip. It wasn't immediately fatal, but without treatment, the big cat would die from infection or blood loss. "They were tracking you, weren't they?" Jack murmured. "But you got away somehow." The sound of an engine in the distance made his decision for him. Moving with the deliberate efficiency of someone used to wilderness emergencies, Jack removed his jacket and carefully laid it over the panther's eyes, knowing the darkness might calm it. Then, with strength that belied his age, he gathered the 150-pound cat into his arms. The panther offered surprisingly little resistance, either too weak or somehow sensing Jack's intent to help. "Duke, come," he commanded, and began the difficult journey back to his farm. Every step, a careful balance between speed and caution. By the time Jack reached his barn, sweat soaked his shirt despite the cool morning air. He laid the Panther down on a bed of clean straw in an empty horse stall, quickly securing the door behind him. The big cat was still conscious but barely moving, its breathing shallow. Jack hadn't treated a big cat since his days with Fish and Wildlife, but some skills never fade. He gathered supplies from his emergency veterinary kit, antibiotics left over from when his horse had developed an infection last year, gauze, disinfectant, and a suture kit. "This isn't going to be pleasant for either of us," he told the Panther, approaching cautiously with a syringe of sedative. The cat's eyes followed him, wary but too weak to resist. The injection went smoother than expected, and within minutes, the Panther's eyes drifted closed. Working methodically, Jack cleaned and treated the wound. The bullet had passed clean through, missing bone and major arteries by mere inches. "Lucky cat," he muttered as he stitched the entry and exit wounds. Once finished, he administered antibiotics and placed water within reach for when the animal awoke. Standing back, Jack considered his situation. He'd just treated and was now harboring a critically endangered species that had clearly been targeted by poachers. By law, he should contact the authorities immediately, but years of experience had taught him to be cautious. Poachers often had connections, informants within local law enforcement. One careless call could alert them before federal authorities could respond. The sound of vehicles approaching down his long driveway interrupted his thoughts. Duke began barking frantically from outside the barn. Moving quickly, Jack exited the barn, secured the door, and made his way toward the house. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows were pulling up in front of his farmhouse. 6 men emerged, expensive outdoor gear, but not hunter's attire. Too polished, too coordinated. They moved with the practiced precision of people used to intimidation. Jack kept his expression neutral, adjusting his worn cap as he approached them, shotgun held casually at his side. Let them think he was just another simple farmer, unaware of their true purpose. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he called out, his voice friendly but guarded. A tall man with a close-cropped beard stepped forward, sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Mr. Harmon? Adrian Mercer." The man extended his hand, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We're tracking an animal that escaped during illegal transport last night. We have reason to believe it passed through your property." Jack shook the offered hand, noting the man's grip, too firm, trying to establish dominance. Amateur tactics. "What kind of animal we talking about?" "A mountain lion," Mercer replied smoothly. "Part of a licensed conservation program. It's sedated but could still be dangerous. We're authorized to retrieve it." Jack observed the other men spreading out slightly, 2 heading toward his barn with feigned casualness. Another stood by the vehicles, hand suspiciously close to his jacket. None of them moved like conservation officers. Jack had worked with those men and women for 20 years. These were something else entirely. "Haven't seen any mountain lion," Jack said with a shrug. "But you're welcome to look around the fields. Just stay clear of my south pasture. Got a bull there that doesn't take kindly to strangers." Mercer's smile tightened. "We'll need to check your buildings too, Mr. Harmon. Standard procedure." "Got a warrant?" Jack asked mildly. "This is a dangerous animal, sir. Public safety exception." "Funny thing," Jack replied, shifting his weight slightly, positioning himself between the men and the direct path to his barn. "In my 40 years dealing with wildlife, I've never known a mountain lion to head toward buildings when it's injured. They seek isolation, dense cover. Your best bet would be the ravine about 2 miles east of here." Mercer studied him for a long moment. "You seem to know a lot about big cats, Mr. Harmon." "Used to work Fish and Wildlife," Jack said simply. "Now, unless you've got that warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to stick to the fields or head on back to the road." The men by the barn had stopped, looking back to Mercer for direction. Jack could feel the tension rising, could see the calculation in Mercer's eyes, weighing the risk of forcing the issue against the possibility that Jack was telling the truth about the Panther's location. "We'll check the ravine," Mercer finally said, his voice cool. "But we'll be back, Mr. Harmon. That animal is extremely valuable." "I bet it is," Jack replied evenly. "Good luck with your search." He stood motionless, watching as the men reluctantly returned to their vehicles. Only when they had disappeared down his driveway did Jack allow himself to exhale. Duke pressed against his leg, still growling softly in the direction the SUVs had gone. "This isn't over, boy," Jack murmured, his hand falling to the dog's head. "Not by a long shot." Back in the barn, the Panther was beginning to stir, its magnificent eyes opening to fix on Jack with newfound awareness. In them, Jack saw something that strengthened his resolve. Not just a wild animal, but a fellow creature fighting to survive against those who would exploit it. Jack checked his watch. It was just past 7 in the morning. He needed to make a call, but not to local authorities. He needed someone he could trust, someone with the power and resources to handle this situation properly. Reaching for his cell phone, he scrolled to a number he hadn't used in years. A direct line to his former supervisor at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, now a deputy director at the Department of Interior. As he waited for the call to connect, Jack's mind was already calculating his next moves. The poachers would return, better prepared and more determined. He had until nightfall at most to prepare. The farmhouse had defensible positions, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. "Sarah, it's Jack Harmon," he said when the call connected. "I need your help. It's about a Florida panther and the people hunting it." Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm by evening. Jack Harmon tightened his grip on the phone. After years of quiet retirement, he was about to be thrust back into a world of danger he thought he'd left behind. But some things were worth fighting for, and as he glanced back at the wounded panther watching him through the stall door, he knew this was one of them. Jack ended the call with Sarah feeling marginally better about his chances. She'd been shocked to hear from him after all these years, but had promised immediate action. A specialized team from the Fish and Wildlife Service would be dispatched, along with FBI support given the interstate nature of the exotic animal trafficking. The problem was, the nearest qualified team was in Atlanta, at least 8 hours away. "Looks like it's just us for a while," Jack told Duke as he secured the barn door. The panther had drifted back to sleep, the sedative and antibiotics doing their work. It was a miracle the animal had survived this long. Florida panthers were hardy creatures, but this one had clearly been through hell. Jack returned to the house, his mind churning through options. The poachers, and he had no doubt that's what they were, despite their conservation program story, would be back. Mercer hadn't struck him as the type to give up easily, especially with the kind of money endangered big cats commanded on the black market. In his bedroom, Jack knelt before an old cedar chest that hadn't been opened in years. Inside lay remnants of his former life, his Fish and Wildlife badge, commendations, and photographs of a younger Jack standing beside various teams in remote locations, from the Everglades to the Alaskan wilderness. Beneath these mementos lay what he was looking for: a tactical vest, a pair of night vision goggles that were outdated but functional, and a Glock 9mm still in its holster. "Never thought I'd need these again," he muttered, checking the firearm with practiced hands. He'd kept it cleaned and maintained out of habit, though he'd hoped never to use it again after what happened in the Everglades 17 years ago, the incident that had pushed him into early retirement. Jack's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Harmon," he answered cautiously. "Mr. Harmon, this is Sheriff Ellis from the County Sheriff's Department. We received a report about an escaped dangerous animal in your area. Mind if I come by to discuss it?" Jack hesitated. The timing was too convenient. "Who reported this exactly, Sheriff?" A slight pause. "A wildlife conservation team. They're properly licensed, Mr. Harmon." "I see. And have you verified these licenses yourself?" Another pause, longer this time. They seemed legitimate, but I'd be happy to look into it more thoroughly. You do that, Sheriff. In the meantime, I've already contacted the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service, since endangered species fall under their jurisdiction. They're sending a team. I see. The sheriff's tone had cooled noticeably. Well, I'll still need to come by. Public safety concern. Of course, I'll be here. Jack hung up, his suspicions confirmed. Either the sheriff was on the poacher's payroll, or he was merely careless in his verification procedures. Either way, Jack couldn't count on local law enforcement. Moving with renewed urgency, Jack went to work. He closed and locked all ground floor windows, drawing curtains to prevent anyone from seeing inside. From the shed, he retrieved motion-activated floodlights, which he installed covering all approaches to the house and barn. His property sat on a gentle rise, giving him good visibility of the surrounding area, but the dense forest to the east provided ample cover for anyone trying to approach unseen. Jack's cell phone battery was running low, so he plugged it in, unwilling to lose his communication lifeline. As an afterthought, he dug out an old handheld radio from his emergency kit, checking that it still worked. If the poachers were professionals, they might try to jam cell signals. A soft whine from Duke drew Jack's attention to the window. A patrol car was coming up the drive. "Here we go, boy," Jack said, patting the dog's head. "Stay close." Sheriff Ellis was a heavy-set man with a florid face and small, assessing eyes. He stepped from his vehicle with the careful movements of someone trying to appear relaxed while on high alert. "Mr. Harmon," he called, approaching the porch where Jack stood waiting. "Appreciate you taking the time." "Sheriff," Jack acknowledged with a nod, keeping his expression neutral. "What can I help you with?" Ellis glanced around the property, his gaze lingering on the barn. "Like I said on the phone, we've got reports of a dangerous animal. Mountain lion, supposedly. Conservation team lost it during transport. They seemed pretty concerned." "Did they now?" Jack leaned against the porch railing. "Funny thing about mountain lions, Sheriff. They're not usually transported through rural Tennessee, especially Florida panthers, which I'm guessing is what they're really after." Ellis's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem well informed." 20 years with Fish and Wildlife tends to do that." Jack straightened. "Those men aren't conservationists. They're poachers, and that escaped animal is an endangered Florida panther, likely destined for a private collection or parts trade." The sheriff removed his hat, wiping his brow, though the day wasn't particularly warm. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Harmon." "It is, which is why I've contacted federal authorities. They'll be here by nightfall." Ellis replaced his hat, his expression unreadable. "I see. Well, in the meantime, I still need to check your property. Standard procedure." "You got a warrant?" "Don't make this difficult, Harmon." Jack's voice remained level, but his stance shifted subtly. "I'm not being difficult, Sheriff. I'm exercising my constitutional rights. No warrant, no search. And if those men come back before the feds arrive, I'll consider them trespassers." The two men stood facing each other, tension crackling between them. Finally, Ellis stepped back. "I'll be back with a warrant," he said, his tone clipped. "In the meantime, if you see this animal, you call me immediately. Understood?" "Crystal clear, Sheriff." Jack watched Ellis drive away, then immediately returned to his preparations. The confrontation had confirmed his worst fears. Local law enforcement couldn't be trusted. He was on his own until federal help arrived. In the barn, Jack checked on the panther. The big cat was awake, eyes tracking him warily as he approached. Its breathing seemed steadier, and it had lapped at the water he'd left. "You're tougher than you look," Jack told it, maintaining a respectful distance. "But we're not out of the woods yet." The panther's ears flicked toward the barn door a moment before Jack heard the vehicle approaching. It wasn't the sheriff returning. The engine had the distinctive purr of an expensive SUV. Moving quickly, Jack exited the barn, securing the door behind him. From his vantage point, He could see the black SUV that had stopped at the end of his driveway. Just one vehicle this time, and it wasn't advancing. Someone was watching the property. Jack's jaw tightened. The poachers were establishing surveillance, probably waiting for nightfall. They wouldn't risk a direct confrontation in broad daylight, not with witnesses potentially passing on the main road. But once darkness fell, all bets were off. Inside the house, Jack checked his watch. It was just past noon. The federal team wouldn't arrive until late evening at the earliest. He was facing at least 8 hours alone against an unknown number of determined, well-equipped adversaries. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, Jack felt a familiar calm settling over him, a focused clarity he hadn't experienced since his active duty days. The years fell away as muscle memory and training reasserted themselves. Jack retrieved his satellite phone from the emergency kit, relieved to find it still functional. If the poachers did jam cell signals, this would be his backup communication. He sent a text to Sarah with an update on the situation, including the sheriff's suspicious behavior. Next, he checked his ammunition supply. Besides the shotgun and Glock, he had a hunting rifle, a Remington 700 with a scope that would give him range advantage if needed. Jack hoped it wouldn't come to that, but he wasn't naive. Men like Mercer didn't give up millions in potential profit without a fight. The sound of another vehicle approaching pulled Jack back to the window. It was the sheriff returning, and he wasn't alone. 2 deputies accompanied him, along with a man in a suit who Jack guessed was a judge or magistrate. They had his warrant. "That was fast," Jack muttered to Duke. The dog growled low in his throat, sensing his master's tension. Jack stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand, but pointed safely downward. The small delegation approached, Sheriff Ellis in the lead, with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Mr. Harmon," Ellis called out, "I have a warrant to search these premises for a dangerous escaped animal." He held up an official-looking document. "I suggest you cooperate fully." Jack took the warrant, scanning it quickly. It appeared legitimate, though hastily prepared. He had no legal grounds to refuse now. "Fine," he said, stepping aside, "but I'm accompanying you every step of the way." As the men approached the barn, Jack felt the weight of the Glock against his lower back, hidden beneath his jacket. The next few minutes would determine whether this situation remained merely tense or exploded into something far worse. The black SUV was still visible at the end of his driveway, watching, waiting. Jack could feel the pressure building from all sides, closing in on him and the wounded creature he'd chosen to protect. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds momentarily, casting long shadows across the farm. The calm before the storm. Jack Harmon squared his shoulders and followed the sheriff toward the barn, each step measured and deliberate. Whatever came next, he was ready. Sheriff Ellis pushed open the barn door, the aged hinges creaking in protest. Sunlight streamed through the entrance, illuminating dancing dust motes and casting long shadows across the weathered wooden floor. Jack followed closely, his expression carefully neutral despite the hammering of his heart against his ribs. "What exactly are we looking for, Sheriff?" asked one of the deputies, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25. Ellis's eyes narrowed as he scanned the barn's interior. Mountain lion, possibly injured, extremely dangerous. Jack had been prepared for this moment. During the brief window between the sheriff's first visit and his return, he'd worked quickly and methodically. The horse stall where he'd initially placed the Panther now contained only fresh straw and his elderly mare, Sadie, who nickered softly at their entrance. The other stalls housed his small collection of livestock, 2 goats and a cow, all appearing undisturbed and calm. "Animals seem peaceful enough," Jack commented casually. "Strange, considering there's supposedly a predator nearby." Ellis shot him a suspicious glance but continued his search, directing his deputies to check every corner of the barn. Jack remained composed, though his hand never strayed far from the concealed Glock. The man in the suit, who had introduced himself as Judge Pelham, stood awkwardly by the entrance, clearly uncomfortable in the rustic setting. "Check the hayloft," Ellis ordered, pointing to the wooden ladder leading to the storage area above. As one deputy climbed upward, Jack's gaze drifted momentarily toward the back of the barn, where a false wall concealed a small storage room he'd built years ago. It was there, behind that wall, that the Panther now rested, sedated again, and carefully hidden. Before the sheriff's arrival, Jack had administered another dose of sedative, just enough to keep the big cat quiet, but not enough to endanger its already fragile condition. "Nothing up here, Sheriff," called the deputy from the loft. "Just hay and some old equipment." Ellis's frustration was palpable as the search continued, yielding nothing. After 20 minutes of thorough investigation, the barn had been declared clear. Jack allowed himself the slightest breath of relief, but kept his face impassive. The game wasn't over yet. "Let's check the house and outbuildings," Ellis said, his voice tight with suspicion. The search of the farmhouse was equally fruitless, though Jack could see the sheriff's increasing frustration manifesting in increasingly rough handling of his belongings. When Ellis yanked open a closet door with enough force to nearly tear it from its hinges, Judge Pelham finally intervened. "Sheriff, I believe we've been thorough enough," he said, checking his watch. "The warrant doesn't authorize property damage." Ellis glared at Jack, who met his gaze steadily. "Fine," the sheriff finally conceded. "But we'll be watching this property, Harmon. If that animal is here, we'll find it." "I understand, Sheriff," Jack replied evenly. "But like I told you, I haven't seen any mountain lion. Now, if you don't mind, I've got chores to finish before sundown." After the law enforcement contingent departed, Jack watched from his porch as their vehicles disappeared down his driveway. The black SUV that had been observing from a distance was gone too, but Jack harbored no illusions. They were regrouping, not retreating. Back in the barn, Jack carefully opened the hidden room. The Panther lay on its side, breathing steadily, its remarkable eyes half-lidded from the sedative, but still tracking his movements. In the dim light filtering through a small concealed window, the animal's coat gleamed like burnished gold. "That was too close," Jack murmured, checking the cat's bandages. The wounds showed no signs of infection yet, but the animal was still weak from blood loss and trauma. It needed proper veterinary care, something Jack couldn't provide with his limited supplies. As he worked, memories surfaced from the darkest chapter of his career. 17 years ago, deep in the Everglades, Jack had led a task force targeting one of the largest wildlife trafficking operations in U.S. history. The mission had gone catastrophically wrong. A rookie agent's mistake had tipped off the traffickers, resulting in an ambush that left 3 of Jack's team dead and Jack himself seriously wounded. The operation had eventually succeeded. The trafficking ring was dismantled, its leaders imprisoned, but the cost had been too high. Jack had accepted an early retirement package, the physical and emotional scars driving him to seek solitude on his family's farm. For years, he'd avoided anything that might pull him back into that world of danger and moral ambiguity. Until today. Until this magnificent creature had stumbled onto his land, wounded and hunted. "You're stirring up all kinds of trouble," Jack told the Panther, his voice gruff but gentle. The cat blinked slowly in response, a gesture that in feline body language indicated trust. It was remarkable how quickly the wild animal had seemed to accept his presence. Jack checked his watch, 4:37 p.m. Sunset would come around 8 this time of year, and he suspected the poachers would make their move under cover of darkness. The federal team was still hours away. Back in the house, Jack methodically prepared for the coming confrontation. He arranged emergency lighting in strategic locations throughout the property in case the power was cut. Extra ammunition for the shotgun, rifle, and Glock was distributed in accessible hiding spots. He filled containers with water and brought in extra feed for the animals, unsure how long the situation might last. His satellite phone chimed with a message from Sarah. Team ETA midnight. FBI notified. Hold tight. Jack grimaced. Midnight was later than he'd hoped, but at least help was definitely coming. He just had to survive until then. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jack made a final check of the property. The motion-activated lights were functioning properly, and he'd set up a series of simple early warning systems. Fishing lines strung with small bells in the woods, reflective tacks scattered along the main approach paths that would glitter under a flashlight beam. Old-school tactics, but effective. Duke stayed close at his heels, the dog's usual playfulness replaced by alert vigilance. Animals had an instinct for danger, and Duke clearly sensed the coming storm. Jack's cell phone rang just as he was heading back to the house. The caller ID showed Sarah's number. "Jack, we've got a situation," she said without preamble. "The team's been delayed. Storm system moving through Georgia has grounded all flights. They're trying to secure ground transportation, but realistically, they won't reach you until early morning." Jack absorbed this news with grim resignation. "I understand. Any other support available?" "I've contacted the FBI field office in Nashville. They're sending a tactical team, but they're stretched thin with an ongoing terrorism investigation. Best estimate is they might reach you around 3 a.m. "That leaves me on my own for quite a while," Jack observed, keeping his voice level despite the gravity of the situation. "I'm sorry, Jack. If there was any other option..." Sarah's voice trailed off. "It's all right. I've been in tighter spots." That wasn't entirely true, but there was no point in worrying her further. "Just make sure they know what they're walking into when they arrive. These aren't amateur poachers. They're organized, well-equipped, and they've got local law enforcement in their pocket." "Understood. Jack, be careful." After ending the call, Jack stood on his porch watching the sun sink lower, painting the sky in deepening shades of orange and purple. The beauty of it struck him forcefully, perhaps because he understood all too well that this might be the last sunset he ever witnessed. He pushed the thought aside. Fatalistic thinking wouldn't help him survive the night. Instead, he mentally reviewed his preparations, looking for weaknesses, contingencies he hadn't considered. As darkness began to fall, Jack made one final trip to the barn. The Panther was more alert now, the sedative wearing off. It watched him with those intense amber eyes as he checked its bandages one last time. "We've got a long night ahead of us," Jack told the big cat, "but I made you a promise, and I intend to keep it." The Panther blinked slowly at him, and Jack allowed himself a slight smile. Then he secured the hidden room, made sure the barn looked undisturbed, and headed back to the house. Night had fallen completely now. The first stars were appearing in the clear Tennessee sky. Jack Harmon stood in his darkened living room, Remington shotgun in hand, watching and waiting as the world around him grew still. The hunters would come soon, and when they did, they would discover that their prey had found a protector who knew their game all too well. The old farmhouse creaked and settled around Jack as the temperature dropped with nightfall. He'd positioned himself in the darkened front room, away from windows, with clear sight lines to both the main driveway and the approach from the forest edge. Duke lay at his feet, ears pricked forward, occasionally lifting his head to sniff the air. The digital clock on the mantel read 9:42 p.m. Nearly 2 hours had passed since darkness fell, with no sign of the poachers. The waiting was always the hardest part, the slow accumulation of tension, the hyper-awareness of every sound and shadow. Jack had turned off all lights in the house, allowing his eyes to fully adapt to the darkness. The quarter moon provided just enough illumination to distinguish shapes and movement outside. He'd positioned night vision goggles nearby, though he'd used them sparingly to conserve the aging battery. Duke suddenly tensed, a low growl building in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered, his hand automatically tightening on the shotgun. The dog rose, hackles raised, staring intently toward the eastern tree line. Jack couldn't see anything yet, but he trusted Duke's senses. Something, or someone, was out there. Jack reached for the night vision goggles, slipping them on with practiced ease. The world transformed into shades of green, details emerging from the darkness. He scanned the tree line methodically, left to right, searching for any anomaly. There, a brief flicker of movement between the trees, then another about 20 yards to the right. Two figures moving with deliberate stealth, using the forest for cover as they approached the property. "So it begins," Jack murmured, removing the goggles. He remained still, watching, assessing. These would be scouts, checking the layout, looking for security measures and occupants. The main force would follow once they'd reported back. Sure enough, after several minutes of observation, the figures retreated into the woods. Jack knew what would come next. They'd report that the house was dark, the property seemingly quiet. They might have spotted some of his motion sensors and lights, but not all. They'd develop a plan of approach, likely from multiple angles. Jack glanced at his watch. Nearly 10 p.m. now. 5 hours until the FBI might arrive, if Sarah's estimate held. He was going to have to handle this alone. Moving silently through the darkened house, Jack made his final preparations. He positioned the Remington rifle near the back window that overlooked the barn, ensuring it was loaded and ready. The Glock was secured in a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. Extra ammunition was distributed in accessible locations throughout the house. Duke followed at his heels, the dog's usual playful demeanor replaced by alert vigilance. Jack patted his head reassuringly. "Good boy. You stay close now." At 10:17, the first bell sounded, a faint tinkling from the northeast corner of the property, where Jack had strung his makeshift alarm system. They were coming, and they weren't bothering with the driveway. Smart, but expected. Jack positioned himself in the kitchen, which offered views of both the barn and the rear approach to the house. Through his night vision goggles, he counted 4 figures now, moving in a tactical formation that confirmed his suspicions. These were professionals, not ordinary poachers. They carried what appeared to be assault rifles and moved with the coordinated precision of military or ex-military personnel. 2 headed toward the barn, while the other 2 approached the house from different angles. Jack's jaw tightened. They were splitting their forces, likely planning to secure both structures simultaneously. A soft click from outside told Jack they were cutting the power. Seconds later, the house went dark. Not that it made much difference, since he'd already been operating without lights. What it did tell him was that they were making their move now. The sudden brightness of tactical flashlights cutting through the darkness confirmed it. One beam swept across the kitchen window, and Jack pressed himself against the wall, out of sight. Duke, trained to stay quiet during Jack's hunting expeditions, remained still beside him. The crackle of a radio carried through the night. "Alpha team in position at the barn. No sign of the target." "Roger that. Bravo team approaching the house now. Maintain radio discipline." Jack checked the shotgun one last time, then made his decision. The barn was his priority. He needed to protect the Panther. The house was just property. The endangered animal represented something far more valuable. Moving silently through the back door, Jack stuck to the shadows, using the outbuildings as cover as he made his way toward the barn. Duke followed, equally silent, a darker shadow among shadows. The 2 men at the barn were working on the padlock Jack had installed earlier. He could hear the soft metallic sounds of picking tools. They had their backs to him, confident in their tactical advantage. Jack circled wide, approaching from the blind side of the barn. When he was within 30 yards, he raised the shotgun and called out in a clear, authoritative voice, "Federal wildlife officer, drop your weapons and put your hands in the air." The reaction was immediate. Both men spun around, raising their rifles. Jack had anticipated this. They weren't the surrendering type. Before they could acquire him as a target in the darkness, he fired a warning shot into the air. Next one won't be a warning. Drop your weapons now." For a tense moment, Jack thought they might actually comply. Then one of them shouted, "It's just one guy," and opened fire. The muzzle flash illuminated the night as bullets splintered the wood of a nearby feed trough. Jack dove for cover behind a tractor, returning fire with controlled precision. One of his shots struck something metal with a resounding clang, likely one of their rifles. A pained curse confirmed his hit, followed by the sound of a weapon clattering to the ground. "I'm hit. He got my hand." The second man provided covering fire as his partner retreated, the injured man clutching his hand to his chest. Jack stayed low, knowing that the gunfire would have alerted the other team at the house. Sure enough, shouts came from that direction, followed by the sound of running feet. The situation was escalating rapidly. Jack had to make a decision: stay and defend the barn directly, or use the confusion to draw them away from the Panther. The choice was clear. Whistling softly for Duke to follow, he fired 2 more shots in the direction of the retreating men, then moved quickly toward the east, away from both the barn and house. "He's moving to the east field," one of the men shouted. Flashlight beams swept in Jack's direction, but he was already disappearing into the tall grass that bordered his eastern pasture. Once concealed, Jack circled back, using the darkness and his intimate knowledge of the terrain to his advantage. He could hear the men crashing through the grass behind him, following his false trail. "Spread out! Don't let him circle back!" That voice belonged to Mercer, Jack realized. The leader had joined the hunt. Staying low, Jack worked his way back toward the barn. Duke moved silently beside him, the dog's training proving invaluable. As they approached, Jack could see 2 new figures at the barn door. They'd left men behind, as he'd expected. These men had managed to break the padlock and were entering the barn, flashlights sweeping the interior. Jack needed to act quickly. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved a small object, a homemade flashbang constructed from materials in his workshop. Not as powerful as military grade, but effective enough at close range. Jack waited until both men were inside, then approached the barn door. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the pin on his improvised device, tossed it through the door, and turned away, covering his ears. The flash and bang that followed were impressive. Not enough to cause permanent damage, but certainly enough to disorient. Jack rushed in immediately after, shotgun raised. Both men were staggering, disoriented by the sudden light and noise. One had dropped his weapon, the other was raising his unsteadily. Jack closed the distance and swung the butt of his shotgun in a practiced arc, connecting with the armed man's temple. He dropped without a sound. The second man, regaining his senses, lunged for his fallen weapon. "Don't," Jack warned, aiming the shotgun directly at him. Something in Jack's voice, the calm certainty of a man who'd faced worse situations, made the poacher freeze. "On your knees, hands behind your head," Jack commanded. The man complied, his expression a mixture of fear and hatred. "You have no idea what you're getting into, old man," he spat. "Do you know who we work for?" "Don't know, don't care," Jack replied, quickly securing the man's wrists with zip ties from his pocket. "All I care about is that you're trafficking an endangered species, and that ends tonight." Jack secured the unconscious man with another set of zip ties, then quickly checked both captives' pockets, retrieving cell phones, knives, and a set of keys. The radio on the second man's belt crackled to life. "Team 2, report. Have you secured the barn?" "Over." Jack hesitated, then lifted the radio. Disguising his voice slightly, he responded, "Still searching. No sign of the target." "Over." A brief pause. "Continue search. Be thorough. Team 1 is returning to your position." "Over." "Copy that," Jack replied, then set the radio down. He didn't have much time. Mercer and the others would realize something was wrong the moment they arrived at the barn. Moving quickly, Jack dragged both restrained men to an empty stall, securing them to a sturdy post with additional zip ties. He gagged them with clean rags to prevent them from calling out. The unconscious man was beginning to stir, moaning softly against his gag. "You'll live," Jack told him curtly, "which is more consideration than you'd have shown that panther." With the immediate threat contained, Jack checked on the hidden room. The big cat was awake, its amber eyes luminous in the darkness, watching Jack with alert intensity. The gunfire and commotion had clearly disturbed it, but the panther remained remarkably calm, as if understanding that Jack represented safety. "Won't be long now," Jack murmured to the panther. "Help's coming." A sound outside caught his attention. Vehicle engines approaching. Jack peered through a crack in the barn wall. 2 of the black SUVs were returning, headlights cutting through the darkness as they pulled up near the house. Men spilled out, weapons ready, moving with tactical precision. Mercer's voice carried clearly through the night. "Team 2, report. Where are you?" When no answer came, Mercer gestured sharply to his men. "Johnson, Rivera, secure the perimeter. Phillips and Weiss with me. We're checking the barn." Jack quickly assessed his options. The barn had only 2 entrances, the main doors at the front and a smaller door at the back. The windows were too narrow for a man to pass through. He was effectively cornered, with at least 3 armed men approaching. Fighting his way out wasn't an option, not against those numbers and firepower. He needed a diversion. Jack's eyes fell on the old tractor parked just outside the barn's back door. An idea formed rapidly. Moving with quiet urgency, he slipped out the back door, staying low in the shadows. Duke followed silently at his heels. Reaching the tractor, Jack used the keys he'd taken from the captured poacher to start the engine. It rumbled to life with a loud, rattling roar. Without switching on the headlights, Jack engaged the gear and jumped clear, leaving the tractor to lumber forward on its own, heading toward the forest edge. The reaction was immediate. Shouts of alarm rang out as the men turned their attention to the moving vehicle. "There he goes! The tractor!" Gunfire erupted, bullets pinging off the tractor's metal body. Jack used the distraction to circle back toward the house, Duke shadowing his movements. If he could reach the house, he could use its defensive positions to better advantage. Halfway there, a shout went up. "It's empty! The tractor's empty!" "He's still here somewhere," Mercer's voice tight with fury. "Find him!" Jack quickened his pace, but a flashlight beam suddenly swept across his position. "There! By the house!" Jack didn't hesitate. He sprinted the remaining distance, Duke bounding ahead. Bullets kicked up dirt at his heels as he ran in a zigzag pattern, making himself a harder target. Reaching the back porch, he crashed through the door, slammed it shut, and upended a heavy cabinet against it. The house wouldn't provide protection for long, but it gave him options. Jack moved quickly to the front room, positioning himself away from windows. Outside, he could hear Mercer organizing his men. "Rivera, maintain position at the barn. Johnson, circle around to the east side of the house. Phillips, with me at the front. Weiss, take the west side. He's not getting out of there alive." Jack's satellite phone vibrated in his pocket. Sarah's text was brief. "FBI ETA 2 hours. Hang tight." 2 hours. Jack grimaced. A lot could happen in 2 hours, and none of it good. The sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. They were making their entry. Jack readied the shotgun. Duke growled softly beside him, hackles raised. "Federal Fish and Wildlife agents will be here within the hour," Jack called out, his voice steady and carrying. "You're facing federal charges for trafficking endangered species, assault on a federal officer, and trespassing. Surrender now, and I'll put in a good word with the prosecutor." Laughter met his announcement. "Nice try, old man," Mercer's voice responded. "But we both know help isn't coming anytime soon. Sheriff Ellis made sure of that. Roadblocks for public safety due to an escaped dangerous animal. No one's getting through until morning." Jack's stomach tightened. If Mercer was telling the truth, the FBI team might be delayed even further. The local sheriff was more deeply involved than he'd suspected. "Last chance," Jack called. "Walk away now." "Not without that cat," Mercer replied. "Do Do you have any idea what it's worth? A purebred Florida Panther, $2 million minimum to the right buyer, worth a few casualties. More glass breaking, this time from the living room. They were coming in from multiple points. Jack backed toward the stairs, maintaining tactical positioning. Duke stayed close, alert to every sound. A figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. Jack fired a warning shot that splintered the doorframe inches from the man's head. The figure ducked back with a curse. "We can do this all night, Harmon," Mercer called. "But you're outnumbered and outgunned. Tell us where the cat is and maybe you walk away from this." Jack didn't bother responding. Words were useless now. Instead, he focused on survival. The staircase offered a defensible position. Anyone coming up would be exposed, with little cover. Movement caught his eye, a shadow passing by the front window. They were coordinating, preparing for a simultaneous breach from multiple directions. Classic, tactical approach. Jack whistled softly, directing Duke to the top of the stairs where the dog would have cover but could still alert him to anyone approaching from behind. Then he readied himself for the assault he knew was coming. It began with a flashbang through the front window, professional grade, unlike Jack's homemade version. The concussive force and blinding light filled the room, but Jack had anticipated this, closing his eyes and covering his ears at the last second. Even so, the impact was disorienting. Before he could fully recover, the front door burst open. Two figures rushed in, weapons raised. Jack fired twice from his position on the stairs, forcing them back into cover. "He's on the stairs," one shouted. A barrage of gunfire tore through the wooden banister, sending splinters flying. Jack pressed himself against the wall, staying low. When the firing paused, he risked a quick glance around the corner and fired again, his shot catching one of the men in the shoulder. The man went down with a cry of pain. "Phillips is hit!" someone yelled. Jack used the momentary confusion to retreat further up the stairs, maintaining his defensive advantage. From below, he heard Mercer giving orders. "Johnson, go around back. Come down from the second floor. Weiss, keep him pinned down. I'm checking the barn." Jack's heart sank. Mercer was heading for the Panther. He had to make a choice: maintain his defensive position or risk everything to protect the endangered animal. It wasn't really a choice at all. "Duke, come," Jack commanded, and began moving toward the back of the second floor. There was a window in the spare bedroom that overlooked the roof of the back porch. From there, he might be able to reach the ground and intercept Mercer before he discovered the Panther's hiding place. Gunfire continued from below as Weiss maintained suppressing fire, bullets thudding into the walls and ceiling. Jack stayed low, crawling when necessary, Duke following his lead. Reaching the spare bedroom, Jack peered cautiously out the window. The drop to the porch roof was about 8 feet. Manageable, but not without risk. More concerning was the open ground he'd have to cross to reach the barn. He'd be exposed, vulnerable. Through the window, Jack could see Mercer approaching the barn, weapon ready. There was no more time for caution. "Stay, Duke," Jack ordered, knowing the dog would be safer inside. Then, taking a deep breath, he shouldered open the window and prepared to make his move. Jack eased himself out the window, hanging momentarily before dropping onto the porch roof. The impact sent a jolt of pain through his aging knees, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. From this vantage point, he could see Mercer approaching the barn, rifle raised, moving with the practiced caution of a man accustomed to dangerous situations. Behind Jack, the sound of footsteps on the stairs told him Johnson was making his way to the second floor. Time was running out. Taking a deep breath, Jack lowered himself to the edge of the porch roof and dropped to the ground, landing in a crouch behind an old rain barrel. The distance to the barn was about 50 yards of open ground, a daunting prospect with armed men watching the property. Jack needed a distraction. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved his last homemade flashbang, calculating the best use for it. Mercer had reached the barn door now, pausing to examine the broken padlock. He spoke into his radio, but Jack was too far away to make out the words. Whatever Mercer had said prompted a response from the man still inside the house. Renewed gunfire toward the stairs, keeping any potential threat pinned down. Mercer thought Jack was still inside. It was now or never. Jack pulled the pin on his improvised device and threw it as far as he could toward the eastern edge of his property, away from both the house and barn. The flash and bang that followed lit up the night momentarily, drawing everyone's attention. In that crucial moment of distraction, Jack sprinted toward the barn, keeping low, using the shadows for what little cover they provided. He was halfway there when a shout went up. "There! By the barn!" A bullet kicked up dirt near Jack's feet, then another closer still. He didn't slow down, zigzagging as he ran, making himself a harder target. 20 yards to go, 15, 10. Something hot and sharp grazed his left arm, a bullet, close enough to tear his jacket and break skin. Jack barely registered the pain, his focus entirely on reaching the barn before Mercer could discover the Panther. At 5 yards out, Jack launched himself forward in a diving tackle, crashing into Mercer just as the man was entering the barn. Both men went down hard, Mercer's rifle clattering across the wooden floor. Jack recovered first, driving his fist into Mercer's jaw with all the force he could muster. Mercer was younger, stronger, but Jack had desperation and decades of experience on his side. They grappled in the darkness of the barn entrance, each man fighting for dominance. Jack landed another solid blow, but Mercer countered with a knee to Jack's ribs that drove the air from his lungs. Rolling away, Jack scrambled for his shotgun, which had fallen during the initial tackle. His fingers closed around the barrel just as Mercer pulled a handgun from a shoulder holster. Jack swung the shotgun like a club, knocking the pistol from Mercer's grip before it could be brought to bear. "You're dead, old man," Mercer snarled, blood trickling from his split lip. "You and that cat both." "Not today," Jack replied, rising to a crouch, shotgun now properly gripped and aimed. Mercer's eyes narrowed, calculating his odds. Then, with surprising speed, he lunged not for Jack, but for something behind him, the radio on the belt of one of the restrained men in the stall. "He's in the barn!" Mercer shouted into the device before Jack could stop him. "The cat's here too! Everyone converge!" Jack tackled him again, sending the radio skittering across the floor. But the damage was done. Already he could hear shouts and footsteps approaching from the house. "It's over, Harmon," Mercer said, a grim smile spreading across his face despite his position pinned beneath Jack. "My men will be here in seconds." Jack knew Mercer was right. He was outnumbered, his position compromised. But he'd sworn to protect the Panther, and he wasn't about to break that promise. With a swift, decisive movement, Jack brought the butt of the shotgun down on Mercer's temple, rendering him unconscious. Then he quickly secured the man with zip ties from his pocket, adding him to the collection in the stall. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Jack estimated he had less than a minute before they reached the barn. Not enough time to hide or set up an effective defense. A new plan formed in his mind. Desperate, risky, but potentially their only chance. Moving quickly to the hidden room, Jack found the Panther alert and watching him intently, as if sensing the urgency of the situation. "Sorry about this," Jack murmured, approaching the big cat carefully. "But we're out of options." With movements born of decades handling wildlife, Jack managed to slide a horse blanket beneath the Panther. The animal growled softly but didn't resist, either too weak from its injuries or somehow understanding Jack's intent to help. Using the blanket as a makeshift stretcher, Jack carefully dragged the Panther from its hiding place. The big cat was heavy, but adrenaline gave Jack strength beyond his years. He positioned the Panther near the barn's back door, then quickly gathered the reins of his old mare, Sadie, from her stall. The approaching men were at the front door now, shouting instructions to each other as they prepared to enter. Jack had seconds, not minutes. With one fluid motion, Jack flung open the back door of the barn. Using the reins, he startled Sadie into a gallop, sending her racing into the night. Simultaneously, he fired his shotgun into the air. The resulting commotion had exactly the effect Jack had hoped for. The men burst through the front door, weapons raised, just in time to see a large animal shape disappearing into the darkness amid the sound of pounding hooves. "There it goes," one shouted. "The cat's escaping." "After it," another commanded, and they rushed back out, giving chase to what they believed was their quarry. Jack allowed himself a grim smile. The diversion wouldn't fool them for long, but it might buy the precious minutes he needed. Working quickly, he returned to the Panther, which had remained remarkably calm throughout the chaos. "Let's go, big guy," Jack murmured, gathering the edges of the blanket to form a more secure carrier. The Panther's weight strained his aging muscles, but determination drove him forward. Step by painful step, he made his way toward the root cellar, an underground storage space about 30 yards from the barn, concealed by overgrown bushes and rarely used. It wasn't ideal, but it was their best hope for a hiding place until help arrived. The night had grown darker, clouds obscuring the quarter moon that had provided scant illumination earlier. This worked in Jack's favor, helping to conceal his movements as he struggled across the open ground, precious cargo in tow. From the direction of the forest came shouts of confusion as the poachers realized they'd been tricked. The horse had disappeared into the woods, but there was no sign of the Panther they sought. "It's a diversion," someone yelled. "Back to the barn." Jack quickened his pace as much as his burden allowed, reaching the root cellar just as flashlight beams began sweeping back toward the barn. With his free hand, he pulled open the heavy wooden doors, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Carefully, Jack maneuvered the Panther down the steps, the big cat surprisingly cooperative despite its obvious discomfort. At the bottom, Jack gently laid his charge on the dirt floor, then hurried back up to close the doors. He had just managed to secure them when a shout rang out. "Check everywhere! The cat's still here somewhere!" Jack pressed himself against the cellar doors, trying to control his ragged breathing. The wound on his arm throbbed, blood seeping through his jacket sleeve. His ribs ached where Mercer had kneed him, and exhaustion pulled at every muscle. But he couldn't rest yet. Flashlight beams swept the area, coming closer to the root cellar. Jack held his breath, shotgun ready. If they found him, he'd go down fighting. But the Panther, at least, might have a chance if the federal agents arrived in time. "Over here!" a voice called, momentarily drawing the searchers away. Jack used the opportunity to better conceal himself among the bushes surrounding the cellar entrance. As he settled into position, something inside the cellar moved. A soft sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whimper, reached his ears. The Panther was in pain, frightened, its injuries aggravated by the rough transport. "Hang in there," Jack whispered, though he knew the animal couldn't understand him. "Help's coming. We just need to hold out a little longer." The flashlight beams were returning now, more focused, more methodical in their search. Jack tightened his grip on the shotgun. The next few minutes would determine whether his promise to protect an endangered creature would cost him his life. The beam of a powerful flashlight swept across the bushes, concealing Jack, missing him by inches. He remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing the way he'd been taught decades ago during his training. The searching poachers were less than 20 feet away now, their frustration palpable in the night air. "It can't have gone far," one of them growled. "Not with that injury." "Check every building, every shed," another commanded, the voice of the man Jack had heard called Weiss. With Mercer incapacitated, Weiss seemed to have assumed leadership. "That cat is worth more than you'll make in 10 years. We're not leaving without it." Jack glanced at his watch, careful to shield its face. 11:47 p.m. If Sarah's last update held true, the FBI was still over an hour away. He needed to keep the Panther hidden until then, but his options were dwindling by the minute. Below him, in the root cellar, the Panther shifted again. The soft sound it made seemed to hang in the still night air, and Jack froze, certain the men would hear it. But a sudden burst of radio chatter distracted them. "Team 1, report," Weiss demanded into his radio. "Any sign of it along the eastern perimeter?" "Negative," came the crackled response. "Nothing but that horse, and it's disappeared into the woods." Weiss cursed, kicking at the ground in frustration. "Spread out. 5-yard intervals. That cat has to be somewhere on this property." The search party moved off, their flashlight beams dancing through the darkness as they began a more systematic sweep of the farm. Jack used the momentary reprieve to check on the Panther. Easing the cellar door open just enough to slip inside, he descended the stone steps into the cool darkness below. The big cat lay where he'd left it, its breathing labored but steady. In the dim light filtering through the partially open door, Jack could see that some of the Panther's wounds had reopened during the rough transport. Blood matted its tawny fur, and its remarkable eyes were clouded with pain. "Sorry about the rough handling," Jack whispered, kneeling beside the injured animal. "Let me take a look at those wounds." Working by touch more than sight, Jack examined the Panther's injuries. The bullet wound was seeping blood again, but not dangerously so. Of more concern was the animal's overall condition. Shock and stress could kill it as surely as any bullet. Jack removed his outer shirt, tearing it into strips to create fresh bandages. As he worked, his mind raced through scenarios, contingency plans, escape routes. The reality was stark. He was cornered, outnumbered, and running out of options. A sound from above froze him mid-motion. Footsteps, approaching the root cellar. Jack eased away from the Panther, positioning himself at the bottom of the steps, shotgun ready. If they opened those doors, he'd have only one chance to surprise them. The footsteps stopped directly above the cellar. Jack held his breath, finger hovering near the trigger of his shotgun. The cellar doors rattled slightly as someone tested them. "Locked," a voice muttered. "Check the next building." The footsteps moved away, and Jack exhaled slowly. That had been too close. They hadn't found the cellar yet, but it was only a matter of time before they conducted a more thorough search. Jack returned to the Panther, finishing the bandaging job with gentle, practiced hands. The big cat watched him, its gaze seeming to hold a deep intelligence. "You and I are in quite a spot," Jack murmured, more to calm himself than the animal. "But I made you a promise, and I intend to keep it." His satellite phone vibrated in his pocket. Shielding the screen carefully, Jack checked the message from Sarah. "FBI delayed by roadblocks. Working to clear them. ETA uncertain. Hang tight." Jack closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this new setback. The sheriff was more deeply involved than he'd realized, actively impeding federal agents. That complicated matters significantly. A cacophony of barking suddenly erupted from the direction of the house. Duke had either escaped or been discovered, and the loyal dog was creating a diversion of his own. Jack felt a surge of both pride and worry for his canine companion. The commotion provided cover for Jack to risk a peek outside. Carefully easing the cellar door open a few inches, he surveyed the situation. Several of the poachers were converging on the house, drawn by Duke's barking, but 2 remained nearby, methodically checking outbuildings. Jack's gaze shifted to the sky. The clouds had thickened, promising rain. Under normal circumstances, he'd welcome the cover a storm might provide, but the Panther's condition made further exposure to the elements dangerous. They needed to stay put. Ducking back inside, Jack considered his dwindling options. The cellar wouldn't remain secure for long. Once the poachers finished with the outbuildings, a more thorough search of the property would inevitably lead them here. A plan began to form in his mind. Risky, potentially suicidal, but possibly their only chance. If he could draw the poachers away, lead them on a chase far from the cellar, the Panther might remain undiscovered until help arrived. It would mean leaving the Panther alone and vulnerable, but staying meant eventual discovery for both of them. At least this way, one of them might survive. Jack checked his weapons. The shotgun was down to 4 shells, and the Glock had a full magazine plus 1 in the chamber. Not much against 6 armed men, but it would have to do. As he prepared to implement his desperate plan, the radio chatter outside intensified. Something had changed in the searcher's tone. A new urgency that put Jack instantly on alert. "All units converge on the house," Weiss commanded. "We've got company. County Sheriff just radioed. FBI's broken through the roadblocks. ETA 15 minutes. We need to finish this now." Jack's heart leaped. The FBI was coming sooner than expected. If he could just hold out a little longer. But Weiss's next words chilled him to the bone. "Johnson, Rivera, bring the accelerant. If we can't find that cat, we burn everything. It'll either run out or die in the flames. Either way, there'll be nothing left for the feds to find." They were going to burn his farm to the ground. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd spent his entire life on this land, had rebuilt the farmhouse with his own hands after his father passed. The thought of losing it all hit him hard, but the threat went beyond property. Fire would spread quickly in the dry summer conditions, potentially reaching the surrounding forest, and the Panther, injured, unable to escape, would certainly perish. Jack's decision was made. He couldn't wait any longer. Gathering his weapons, he prepared to make his move. But first, he knelt once more beside the Panther. "I'll lead them away," he whispered, gently stroking the big cat's head. The Panther blinked slowly at him, that feline gesture of trust that seemed so incongruous coming from a wild predator. "You stay quiet, and with any luck, help will be here soon." Rising to his feet, Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. He had faced danger before, had looked death in the eye more than once during his career. But never had the stakes felt quite so personal, so vital. Outside, the poachers were gathering supplies, preparing to execute their scorched earth strategy. Jack checked his watch again. 12:03 a.m. If the FBI was really 15 minutes out, he just needed to hold the poachers off, prevent them from starting the fires, for a quarter of an hour. 15 minutes. It might as well be an eternity. With one last look at the Panther, Jack eased open the cellar door and slipped into the night. The cool air carried the scent of impending rain, and distant thunder rumbled across the mountains. A storm was coming, both literally and figuratively. Jack moved silently toward the barn, staying low, using every bit of cover available. His plan was simple: create a distraction loud enough to draw all the poachers away from the house and the root cellar, then lead them on a chase through the property until help arrived. Simple, but incredibly dangerous. If they caught him, there would be no mercy. Men willing to burn down an entire farm wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a single witness. As Jack neared the barn, he could see 2 men emerging from the house, carrying red containers that could only be gasoline or diesel fuel. His window of opportunity was closing fast. Taking aim with the rifle, Jack sighted on one of the fuel containers. He took a deep breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out across the property, echoing in the night air. Jack's aim was true. The bullet struck the fuel container, causing it to explode in a spectacular fireball that illuminated the entire yard. The man carrying it was thrown backward, engulfed in flames, screaming in agony as he rolled desperately on the ground. "Sniper!" Weiss shouted, diving for cover. "Everyone down!" Jack didn't waste the moment of confusion. Moving quickly from his position, he fired twice more, one shot high into the air, another toward the far side of the property, creating the impression of multiple shooters. The poachers responded with a barrage of gunfire toward Jack's original position, allowing him to slip away unnoticed. Their training was evident in how quickly they reorganized, establishing a defensive perimeter and coordinating their movements. But Jack had achieved his primary objective. The fuel containers had been abandoned, the immediate threat of fire neutralized. Now came the second phase of his plan, leading them away from the root cellar. Jack circled wide around the barn, then fired a single shot from his new position, before immediately moving again. The poachers turned their attention toward the sound, unleashing another volley that splintered wood and tore through foliage. "He's moving to the west," one of them shouted. "Cut him off." Two men broke from cover, running toward Jack's last known position. He waited until they were committed, then fired again from a completely different angle. Confusion spread through their ranks as they tried to pinpoint his location. "There's more than one," someone yelled. "We're surrounded." Jack allowed himself a grim smile. The illusion was working. They thought they were facing multiple opponents. It wouldn't last long, but it didn't need to. Every minute he kept them distracted was another minute closer to the FBI's arrival. Thunder rolled across the sky, closer now, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The weather would work, both for and against him, providing additional cover but making movement more treacherous on the increasingly muddy ground. A sudden, ferocious barking drew Jack's attention. Duke had found him, the loyal dog slinking through the underbrush to reach his master. Jack gestured for silence, and Duke immediately quieted, pressing against Jack's leg in the darkness. "Good boy," Jack whispered, grateful for the company but concerned that Duke's presence might give away his position. The poachers had regrouped near the house, more cautious now. Weiss was issuing orders, directing his men to establish a more organized search pattern. They were adapting to the situation, their initial confusion giving way to professional discipline. Jack needed to disrupt their momentum again. His gaze fell on the propane tank that supplied his kitchen stove. It sat about 30 yards from the house, far enough that an explosion wouldn't cause catastrophic damage to the structure, but close enough to create another significant distraction. It was a risky shot. If he missed or hit it wrong, nothing would happen. But if he struck it just right... Jack steadied his aim, controlling his breathing despite the rain now soaking through his clothes. Duke remained perfectly still beside him, sensing the importance of the moment. The shot cracked through the night, finding its mark. The propane tank didn't explode immediately. Instead, the puncture created a high-pressure jet of escaping gas that ignited when it reached the burning debris from the earlier fuel container explosion. The resulting fireball was spectacular, illuminating the farm in a surreal orange glow. The poachers scattered for cover, shouting in confusion and alarm. In the chaos, Jack spotted an opening, a clear path toward the forest edge. If he could reach the trees, he could lead the poachers even further from the root cellar, drawing them deep into territory where his superior knowledge of the terrain would give him a critical advantage. "Come on, Duke," he whispered, and together they sprinted through the rain toward the tree line. They had almost reached it when a shout went up. "There he is, by the trees." Gunfire erupted once more, bullets whizzing past Jack's head and thudding into the trunks of nearby trees. One round splintered a branch just inches from his shoulder. Duke yelped as a bullet grazed his flank, but the brave dog kept running. Jack returned fire, not aiming to hit anyone but to force them back into cover. Then he and Duke disappeared into the forest, the darkness and rain swallowing them whole. Behind them, Weiss was bellowing orders. "Johnson, Rivera, that way. Phillips, with me. Carver, maintain position at the house." Good, Jack thought. They were splitting up, reducing their numerical advantage. And one man remained behind, guarding the house, which meant fewer searchers to potentially discover the root cellar. Moving deeper into the forest, Jack found a massive fallen oak that provided temporary shelter from both the rain and searching eyes. Duke pressed against him, shivering slightly from the cold and the stress of the bullet graze. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, quickly examining the wound. It was superficial, painful but not serious. "You're okay." Jack checked his watch. 12:11 a.m. The FBI was supposedly 7 minutes out, but that assumed they could navigate the rural roads in this weather without further delay. His ammunition was running low. 2 shells left for the shotgun, half a magazine for the Glock. He was soaked to the skin, the wound on his arm throbbing painfully, and exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. But giving up wasn't an option. not when they were so close. The sounds of the poachers crashing through the underbrush grew louder as they approached his position. Jack tensed, ready to move again, but a sudden noise from a different direction caught his attention, a rhythmic thumping that rose above the sound of the rain and thunder. Helicopter rotors. Hope surged through Jack's chest. That had to be the FBI. No one else would be flying a helicopter in these conditions. Help was finally coming. The poachers heard it too. Their radio chatter became increasingly frantic. "Boss, we've got a chopper inbound." "I see it," Weiss responded, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Fall back to the vehicles. Priority is evac with minimal exposure." "What about the cat?" someone questioned. "Forget the damn cat. Mercer and the others are still in the barn. Get them and let's go." Jack allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The poachers were retreating, abandoning their search. The Panther was safe, but his relief was premature. A new voice crackled over their radio. The man who'd been left guarding the house. "Sir, I think I found something. There's a root cellar near the east side of the property. Doors are secured, but I think I heard something inside." Jack's blood ran cold. He'd been so focused on leading the main force away that he'd forgotten about the lone guard. Now the Panther's hiding place had been discovered. "Check it out," Weiss ordered. "If the cat's in there, take it. We can still salvage this operation." Jack didn't hesitate. Despite his exhaustion, despite the danger, he began moving back toward the farm, Duke limping slightly but determinedly at his side. The helicopter was getting closer, its searchlight cutting through the rain and darkness, but it might not arrive in time. Through the trees, Jack could see the guard approaching the root cellar, rifle ready. The man kicked at the doors, which Jack had secured as best he could before leaving, but they were old and wouldn't withstand much force. Jack was still too far away. At least 100 yards of open ground separated him from the cellar. He'd never make it in time. The guard kicked again, and one of the cellar doors cracked open. The man leaned forward, shining his flashlight into the darkness below. Jack raised his rifle, knowing a shot would give away his position to any poachers still nearby, but seeing no alternative. He couldn't let them take the Panther, not after everything they'd been through. Before he could fire, a powerful searchlight suddenly illuminated the entire area around the root cellar. The helicopter had arrived, hovering just above the treetops despite the dangerous weather conditions. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "This is the FBI. Drop your weapons. You are surrounded." The guard froze, caught in the blinding light like a deer in headlights. For a moment, Jack thought the man might surrender. Then he saw the guard raise his rifle, aiming not at the helicopter but into the root cellar, at the Panther. Jack had one chance, one shot. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against Jack's shoulder, the report temporarily deafening him despite the thunder and helicopter noise. Through the scope, he saw the guard stagger backward, dropping his weapon as he clutched his shoulder. A clean hit, disabling but not lethal. Jack had never been one to take a life if there was any alternative. The guard fell to his knees, his face contorted with pain and shock. Above, the helicopter's searchlight tracked several fleeing figures, the remaining poachers making a desperate break for their vehicles. Jack rose from his position, Duke still at his side, and began moving toward the root cellar. He'd only taken a few steps when the forest behind him erupted with activity. Men in tactical gear materializing from the darkness, moving with disciplined precision. "FBI, freeze!" a voice commanded from behind him. Jack slowly raised his hands, careful to keep the rifle pointed skyward. "Jack Harmon," he called out clearly. "Former Fish and Wildlife. I'm the one who called this in." A powerful flashlight beam hit him directly, temporarily blinding him. Duke growled protectively, but Jack quieted him with a soft command. "On your knees, hands behind your head," the agent ordered, taking no chances despite Jack's claim. Jack complied without argument. He'd been in law enforcement long enough to know the protocols. Until they confirmed his identity, He was just another armed man in a very volatile situation. 2 agents approached cautiously, one covering him, while the other relieved him of his weapons and checked him for additional threats. "Clear," the second agent announced, then spoke into his radio. "We have a male subject, claims to be Harmon. Proceeding with ID verification." "The Panther's in the root cellar," Jack said urgently. "Injured, needs medical attention, and there are 3 restrained suspects in the barn." The lead agent studied him for a moment, then nodded to his partner. "Richards, verify his ID. Peters, check the cellar. I'll radio for the wildlife specialist to meet us there." While Richards helped Jack to his feet and began the identification process, the agent called Peters moved carefully toward the root cellar, where the wounded guard still knelt in the searchlight's glare, surrounded now by additional FBI agents. Jack pulled his old Fish and Wildlife ID from his pocket, along with his driver's license. "The Panther's been shot," he explained. "Through the hip. I treated it as best I could, but it needs proper veterinary care." Richards examined the credentials, then spoke into his radio. "Control, I need verification on a John Harmon, former Fish and Wildlife Service." He provided Jack's ID number and waited for confirmation. Around them, the operation was in full swing. More agents had emerged from the woods, securing the perimeter and converging on the house and barn. The helicopter maintained its position overhead, its searchlight now tracking the poachers' vehicles as they attempted to flee down the long driveway. "They won't get far," Richards commented, following Jack's gaze. "We've got roadblocks set up at both ends of the valley. Nobody's getting out." The radio crackled. "Richards, subject verified as John Harmon, retired senior enforcement officer, Fish and Wildlife Service. Special Agent Colton wants him brought to the command post once you've secured the scene." "Copy that," Richards replied, then turned to Jack. "Looks like you're who you say you are, Mr. Harmon. I'm Agent Richards, FBI Wildlife Trafficking Task Force." "The Panther," Jack insisted, his mind still on the injured animal. "Our wildlife specialist is on the way," Richards assured him. "Best thing you can do right now is brief our team on what we're dealing with." A commotion near the root cellar drew their attention. Peters had opened the doors fully and was calling for assistance. "We've got the cat. Need the vet team here now." Jack moved toward the cellar, ignoring Richards' half-hearted attempt to hold him back. He needed to see for himself that the Panther was all right. The scene at the cellar entrance was controlled chaos. Peters had descended the steps and was shining his flashlight on the Panther, which was pressed against the far wall, growling weakly at the intrusion. Another agent was keeping the wounded guard secured while speaking into his radio, requesting medical assistance. "Don't corner it," Jack called out, his voice authoritative enough that Peters immediately looked up. "Back away slowly. Let me handle this." Richards had followed Jack and now looked to Peters, who nodded his agreement. "He's been caring for it," Richards explained. "Let him approach." Jack descended the steps carefully, speaking in the same low, calm voice he'd been using with the Panther since finding it. "Easy now. These people are here to help. Just like me." To the astonishment of the watching agents, the big cat's aggressive posture relaxed slightly. Its remarkable eyes fixed on Jack, recognizing him despite the chaos of the past hours. "That's it," Jack murmured, kneeling a few feet away from the Panther. "You're safe now." A new figure appeared at the cellar entrance, a woman in a dark jacket with FBI emblazoned across the back, but also carrying the unmistakable equipment of a wildlife veterinarian. "Dr. Robbins, wildlife specialist," she introduced herself briskly. "Is that our Florida Panther?" "Yes," Jack confirmed. "Gunshot wound through the hip. I treated it as best I could, but it's been a rough night." "Doctor." Robbins descended the steps, her movements measured and professional. She assessed the situation quickly, then prepared a syringe from her kit. "I need to sedate it for transport. Is it allowing you to approach?" "Seems to trust me for whatever reason," Jack acknowledged. Perfect. Keep it calm while I administer the sedative. Working together, they managed to sedate the panther with minimal stress to the already traumatized animal. As the powerful drugs took effect, the big cat's eyes remained fixed on Jack until they finally closed in chemical sleep. "Remarkable specimen," Dr. Robbins commented as she examined the panther more thoroughly. "Male, approximately 4 years old. And you're right about the wound. Clean through the hip, missed vital structures. With proper care, he should make a full recovery." A weight lifted from Jack's shoulders. After everything, the panther would survive. As they prepared the animal for transport, a new voice called down from above. "Mr. Harmon, Special Agent Colton, we need to talk." Jack looked up to see a tall, authoritative woman standing at the cellar entrance. He nodded, gave the panther one final glance, then climbed the steps to meet her. "Quite a situation you've managed here," Colton observed, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp and assessing. 3 poachers zip-tied in your barn, another with a gunshot wound, and a critically endangered Florida panther in your root cellar. Mind filling me in on how all this came about?" Before Jack could respond, shouting erupted from the direction of the driveway. Both Jack and Colton turned to see agents surrounding one of the black SUVs, weapons drawn. The vehicle had apparently attempted to crash through the FBI roadblock, but had been disabled by spike strips. "That would be Mercer's people," Jack explained. "Adrian Mercer, the leader of this operation. He's one of the ones I restrained in the barn." Colton's eyebrow raised slightly. "You've had quite a night, Mr. Harmon. Let's continue this conversation somewhere dry. Your house still intact?" "More or less," Jack confirmed, suddenly aware of just how exhausted he was. The adrenaline that had kept him going was ebbing, leaving behind bone-deep weariness and the sharp ache of his various injuries. As they walked toward the house, Duke limping faithfully beside them, Jack watched the FBI operation unfolding across his property. Agents were securing the scene, collecting evidence, and taking the poachers into custody. The helicopter still circled overhead, its searchlight illuminating the rain-soaked farm in stark white light. "You know," Colton said conversationally, "when we got the call about a retired fish and wildlife officer with an endangered panther, I expected something unusual. But this," she gestured to the chaos around them, "this is something else entirely." Jack managed a tired smile. "Just doing my job, Agent Colton. Old habits die hard." "Indeed they do," she agreed, studying him with newfound respect. "Indeed they do." As they reached the porch, Jack paused to look back at the root cellar, where Dr. Robbins and her team were carefully loading the sedated panther onto a specially designed stretcher. Despite everything, the danger, the violence, the near disaster, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He had kept his promise to protect the magnificent creature, and somehow, against all odds, they had both survived the night. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows of Jack's farmhouse, illuminating a scene far different from the chaos of the previous night. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean, glistening in the early sunlight. Jack sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling before him as he finished briefing Special Agent Colton and her team. "So the sheriff was definitely involved?" Colton asked, making notes on her tablet. Jack nodded, wincing slightly as the FBI medic finished bandaging his arm. He showed up too quickly after Mercer's first visit, knew too many details. And those roadblocks weren't standard procedure. They were deliberately set up to delay your team. "We've taken Sheriff Ellis into custody," Colton confirmed, his deputies singing like a canary. Apparently Ellis has been on Mercer's payroll for over a year, providing protection for their trafficking operations throughout the region. Jack wasn't surprised. Wildlife trafficking was a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise, with enough money changing hands to tempt even those sworn to uphold the law. He'd seen it before, during his career with Fish and Wildlife. "What about Mercer and his men?" Jack asked. Facing multiple federal charges: illegal trafficking of endangered species, assault on a former federal officer, attempted murder, illegal possession of firearms. The list goes on. Colton's satisfaction was evident in her voice. We've been after Mercer's operation for years, but he was always one step ahead of us. Until now. Duke, his flank now properly treated and bandaged, thumped his tail from his position near Jack's feet. The loyal dog hadn't left his master's side since their return to the house. "And the Panther?" Jack asked, the question he'd been most anxious to have answered. At this, Dr. Robbins entered the kitchen, removing her gloves as she joined the conversation. "Stable and on his way to our wildlife rehabilitation center in Knoxville. The bullet wound was clean. Your initial treatment probably saved his life, Mr. Harmon. With proper care, he should make a full recovery." Relief washed over Jack. "Good. That's good. We've also confirmed it's a purebred Florida Panther," Dr. Robbins continued. "Genetic testing will tell us more, but he appears to be from the main population in South Florida. How he ended up this far north is a mystery, though tracking collars on other panthers have shown they can roam hundreds of miles from their home territory. Or he had help," Jack suggested grimly. "Mercer mentioned the Panther was worth $2 million to the right buyer. For that kind of money, they might have captured it in Florida and been transporting it to a private collector when it escaped." Colton nodded. "We'll get the full story from Mercer and his men. Either way, once he's recovered, we'll return him to protected habitat in Florida." The kitchen had gradually emptied as various agents departed to continue processing the scene outside. Jack's farm had been transformed into a hub of law enforcement activity, evidence technicians photographing and collecting, agents securing the perimeter, and a small army of vehicles with various federal and state agency markings parked along his driveway. "Your property will be returned to normal as soon as possible, Mr. Harmon," Colton assured him, noting his gaze. "The Bureau will also cover damages incurred during this operation." Jack waved away her concern. "The buildings can be repaired. What matters is that Mercer's operation has been shut down." A young agent appeared at the doorway. "Agent Colton, there's someone here who's asking to speak with Mr. Harmon. Says she's from the Department of Interior." Jack looked up, surprised. "Sarah?" A moment later, Sarah Wilson strode into the kitchen, her familiar no-nonsense demeanor unchanged, despite the 17 years since Jack had last seen her in person. She'd been a promising junior officer when he retired. Now she wore the authority of her deputy director position with confidence. "Jack Harmon," she said, a smile breaking through her professional facade. "Still finding trouble after all these years?" "Sarah." Jack rose to greet her, extending his hand, which she ignored in favor of a brief but heartfelt hug. "When I got your call, I couldn't believe it," she said, stepping back to look him over. "But I should have known you'd handle it. You always did." "Not alone," Jack admitted. "Not this time." "No," Sarah agreed, nodding to Colton and the remaining FBI personnel. "Good thing, too. Mercer's operation is one of the largest wildlife trafficking networks we've uncovered in a decade. This bust will disrupt illegal trading channels across 3 continents." The significance of what had started as one man protecting an injured animal was not lost on Jack. Sometimes the smallest actions had the greatest consequences. As the day progressed, Jack's property gradually returned to something resembling normalcy. The FBI maintained a presence, but the frantic activity of the early morning gave way to methodical processing. Jack took the opportunity to survey the damage to his farm: bullet holes in walls, broken windows, trampled gardens. All fixable, all insignificant compared to what had been saved. Late in the afternoon, as most of the federal personnel were preparing to depart, Sarah approached Jack on his porch. "The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center called," she informed him. "The Panther's doing well, already alert and responsive. They're optimistic about a full recovery." Jack nodded, pleased but not surprised. "He's a fighter." Like someone else I know, Sarah observed. After a moment's hesitation, she continued, Jack, I've been authorized to offer you a position, consultant with the department's new anti-trafficking task force. Your experience, your instincts. We could use someone like you. The offer caught Jack off guard. He'd left that life behind, had built a quiet existence here on his farm. And yet, the events of the past 24 hours had awakened something in him, a sense of purpose he'd forgotten he possessed. I'm not exactly in my prime anymore, Sarah, he said, gesturing to his bandaged arm. You just single-handedly took down Adrian Mercer's entire operation, she countered. I'd say you've still got what it takes. Jack looked out over his property, considering. Let me think about it. Of course, Sarah handed him a card. Call me when you decide. No pressure. As evening approached, the last of the federal vehicles departed, leaving Jack alone with Duke for the first time since the ordeal began. The silence felt strange after so much chaos. Just you and me again, boy, Jack told the dog, who responded with a contented sigh as he settled on the porch beside his master's chair. 3 weeks later, Jack stood in the observation area of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, watching as Dr. Robbins conducted a final examination of the Panther. The big cat had made a remarkable recovery, its coat now glossy and full, its movements fluid despite the still healing wound in its hip. He's ready, Dr. Robbins announced, stepping out of the enclosure. We'll transport him to Florida tomorrow. The release site is perfect, a protected area with plenty of game and minimal human contact. Jack nodded, his eyes still on the magnificent creature. During his recovery, he'd visited several times, drawn by a connection he couldn't quite explain. The Panther seemed to recognize him, those intelligent amber eyes always finding him among the observers. Would you like to come? Dr. Robbins asked. For the release, it seems fitting given your role in his rescue. Jack considered the offer, then nodded. I'd like that. The following evening found Jack standing in the heart of the Florida Everglades, witnessing the culmination of everything that had begun on his farm. The transport cage sat on the edge of a clearing, its door facing the vast wilderness beyond. Inside, the Panther paced with growing anticipation, sensing its imminent return to freedom. Sarah stood beside Jack, both of them watching as Dr. Robbins made final preparations. Have you thought about my offer? Sarah asked quietly. Jack's gaze remained on the Panther. I have, he said. I'll do it. Part-time advisory role. I'm not leaving the farm. Sarah smiled. I can work with that. Dr. Robbins approached them. We're ready, she announced, then gestured to Jack. Would you like to do the honors? Jack stepped forward, positioning himself at the release mechanism. The Panther stilled, those remarkable eyes finding Jack's one last time. In them, Jack saw something that resonated deep within his own soul. A wild spirit, unbroken despite captivity and injury, ready to reclaim its rightful place in the world. With a decisive motion, Jack opened the cage door. For a moment, the Panther remained still, as if gathering itself. Then, in a fluid surge of power and grace, it bounded forward into freedom, disappearing into the gathering dusk of the Everglades. Jack watched until the last flicker of tawny fur vanished among the sawgrass and cypress. Something settled in his chest, a sense of completion, of coming full circle. 17 years ago, he'd left Fish and Wildlife believing he'd failed in his mission to protect the creatures under his care. Today, he'd helped return one of the most endangered animals in North America to its home. Ready to head back? Sarah asked after a respectful silence. Jack nodded, turning away from the empty clearing. He had a farm to repair, a new consulting position to prepare for, and perhaps most importantly, a renewed purpose that had been missing for far too long. Some debts could never be fully repaid, some wounds never completely healed. But in saving one magnificent creature, Jack Harmon had found a measure of redemption he hadn't known he was seeking. and in the heart of the Everglades, a Florida panther ran free, living proof that sometimes, against all odds, one man could indeed make a difference.